you have until the end of today to have your say on the candidates shortlisted for the position of the country's next Chief Justice. The 4 candidates were submitted to the Judicial Service Commission by President Cyril Ramaphosa after former Chief Justice Mogoeng's term ended last year. So let's get you some insight into this marathon process. We're joined now by senior researcher at UCT's Democratic Governance and Rights Unit. That's Chris Oxtoby. Chris, it's great to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on. So we've been without a permanent Chief Justice in the country since October of last year. Is this usual? Is this a usual amount of time that lapses before the next Chief Justice is appointed?
Morning, Michelle. No, not at all. It's an extraordinary long gap to have been without a permanent Chief Justice, and in effect, it's even longer because the outgoing Chief Justice went on long leave. I think it was in May. So it's an even longer period of time, and that is very unusual. Normally, the process that we're going through now would have happened earlier, and there would have been a replacement ready to take over as soon as the term of office of the outgoing Chief Justice comes to an end. So this is actually quite an unprecedented wait that we've had.
Should we have gotten, given that Mogoeng went on that long leave in May, as you say, should we have gotten the process underway quicker? Because right now we have Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo in the position of acting Chief Justice, and we know how much he has on his plate with the State Capture Inquiry report.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think it illustrates the problem of relying on people in acting positions, which we do quite a lot in the judiciary generally. There have been similarly a lot of acting judges filling in positions on the Constitutional Court for a long time while we've waited for the permanent appointments to be made to that court. And I think the reason that's problematic is because you need a certain degree of permanence and a certain degree of security of tenure for someone in this kind of job, particularly for something like the role of Chief Justice, where the person in that position is responsible for the general direction of the judiciary, has an overall responsibility for the judiciary, which is very difficult to plan for and to do in a meaningful way if you are only acting in that position for an undetermined length of time. So I think it would have been much more desirable if the process had begun earlier. Of course, we are following a slightly different process this time round to what has been the case previously, but it still would have been preferable to have much less of a gap before this new appointment gets made. Absolutely.
I mean, it's one thing to have judges acting in the various courts, but the Chief Justice is a whole other issue. Were there gaps, Chris, in the work that you do at UCT? Have you seen gaps since May of last year until January 2022 that you can identify as a result of us not having a permanent Chief Justice?
I think, yes. I mean, I think, one thing that springs to mind straight away is the kind of attacks, I'm talking metaphorically, not the physical attack on the Constitutional Court building recently, but the sort of attacks and criticism that the judiciary has been subject to in the political space, judges being accused of making all kinds of problematic decisions. I think there's been a problem with the judiciary not having, not that it hasn't had a leader, because it's had a leader in an acting position, but as you say, that leader has been extremely busy with a lot of things on his plate. I think a situation where there'd been a permanent Chief Justice in place, might have helped for the judiciary to have a quick, strong response to those kind of criticisms, for example. And I suspect there will be much going on behind the scenes as well, where longer-term planning would ideally have been going on. Now, we may not yet see the impact of the absence of a permanent Chief Justice on that right now, but it may be something that reveals itself in the future.
Yeah.
So it's very much not been an ideal situation.
Yeah. So today's the final day for public comment. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that process was extended. A amount of time that it was open to public comment was extended, I think. But have you seen the public taking part in this process, Chris, perhaps to the extent that is needed?
So not at this point. I think once the deadline is closed, and the comments that have been made will probably begin circulating, and then I think we'll have a better sense of what's been submitted to the JSC. I think they normally, for these kind of high-profile appointments, there normally are a lot of comments and submissions made. But I think right now it's difficult to know from the outside exactly what the extent and what the content of those comments are. But I would expect that there'll be many of them.
Yeah. So we've got 2 Constitutional Court justices, the Supreme Court of Appeal president, and the Gauteng judge president. They are the 4 candidates that have been shortlisted for the position of Chief Justice. Pardon me. The process itself, it has to be rigorous, right? But what we don't want is a repeat of previous processes that we've seen, which some analysts will say, serve to boost the egos of politicians and lawyers more than it was to really interrogate a candidate.
Yes, absolutely. That's, as you say, very important for all positions in the judiciary, but even more so, I would suggest, for the Chief Justice position, because it is such an important position. There's some really important qualities that I think one needs to assess all the candidates for. One needs to assess things like what their vision and plan is for the judiciary during their tenure. They'll have a major influence on what kind of judges get appointed to the judiciary under their tenure, because they're going to chair the JSC. So, one wants to see what kind of vision and plan they have. So it's really important that the interviews interrogate those kind of issues. They're not taken as an opportunity to grandstand or for members of the commission to sort of to show off. It should be about the candidates and hearing what the candidates' vision is for the judiciary. And again, the crucial point with that is going to be the criteria that the JSC is in fact applying to determine how they are going to assess these candidates.
Yeah.
And that's been a long-running bugbear that those of us who watch the JST often have with the Commission, is that it's not always clear beforehand what those criteria are. So something to watch for in the build-up to the interviews is that it would be a really positive thing if the JSC made some sort of public announcement about the criteria that are going to be applied when the candidates are interviewed next month.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Oxtoby, let me thank you for your time this morning. An incredibly important story, and a reminder to our viewers as well that today is the last day for you to have your say in the appointment of the country's next Chief Justice. Chris is a senior researcher at UCT's Democratic Governance and Rights Unit.